So, hi, I'm Yash. This is joint work with Bernardo, Magri, and Claudio, Orlandi at Aarhus, and Omer, Shlomovits at KSM. Right, so in this work, we're going to study proactive security, where a dishonest majority speaks during refresh, and the rest of the parties stay offline and sort of catch up later. And then we formalize a notion of unanimous erasure for this setting, which I'll argue is the right definition. And in the two event setting, we're going to construct a novel protocol that's native to the mode of operation of threshold wallets cryptocurrencies, and we'll show that it's practical via an implementation. And in the event setting, we prove that it's impossible to achieve this notion, unfortunately, in the standard model, even given pretty strong primitives like cluster setup and ledger. Don't worry if this doesn't make sense right now. I'm going to talk about it more. Right, so let's say Bob has some Bitcoin that he would like to send to Alice. Right? The way he does this is that he takes out his laptop in which he has some sort of signing key, and he presses a button and signs a message that attests to this fact. Now, let's say an attacker turns up and hacks into Bob's laptop and gets his signing key. Right? So now, since she has Bob's signing key, she can basically sign arbitrary messages and redivert the funds to herself in this case. Right? And this is a bad situation. One way of getting around this is Bob could split his signing key into two fragments, call them SK and SK prime, so that one fragment lives on, let's say, his phone, and the other fragment lives on his laptop, so that having access to any one of these fragments at a time won't let you sign messages. Right? And something of this flavor is definitely achieved by multi-sigs already in Bitcoin and Ethereum, but this comes with a number of disadvantages. Specifically, there's no anonymity in a multi-sig. It reveals the structure of who signed. It takes up more bandwidth, and you can't use it as a drop-in replacement in existing protocols. It's in contrast, in a threshold signature, you can split your signing key into many different parts so that you can run some sort of interactive protocol between all the devices that hold shares to produce a signature. And importantly, the signature that it produces looks just like a single party had created it by itself. So you can use it as a drop-in replacement. So to give an idea of parameters, in a 3-of-n signature scheme, any 3 parties should be able to get together to sign. And simultaneously, any 2 malicious colluding parties should be unable to force a third honest party into signing a message that they don't want to. Right? So let's go back to our friend Bob from earlier. The story doesn't finish just after the compromise, right? So like, let's say one of his devices is hacked. There are still funds in his account. There are still funds tied to the secret key. And then the wallet is essentially unusable if one of the devices is hacked. So looking through what happens over time, let's say the hack happens on Monday. He resets his phone on Tuesday, but on Wednesday, his phone gets hacked this time instead of the laptop. And even though on no day, both of his devices were compromised, over the lifetime of the system, all devices do get compromised. And in this case, the attacker gets the other fragment of the signing key and is able to sign messages arbitrarily. And this is quite unfortunate. As a way of getting around this, we could do the following, right? So starting off on Monday with our keys split into different parts, let's make the relationship concrete. Let's say that the 2 fragments add up to a common secret X. This is going to be the secret key, right? Like the common secret. And on Tuesday, what Bob does is he's going to reset his devices and reboot them to kick out any attackers, and also redistribute the shares. So the devices are not now going to hold an independent sharing, SKT and SKT prime, but with the constraint that they add up to the same secret. So the public key for the system is going to remain unchanged, but the shares are going to change. Right? So he does the same thing on Wednesday, which means that in the same scenario where his phone now gets compromised on Wednesday, and the attacker gets information specifically for his device on Wednesday and Monday, we can take a look at concretely what the attacker figures out. Right? The attacker blocking out the things that the attacker doesn't have. We see that there are now 2 equations and 3 variables, and sort of hand-waving details about the distributions of the variables, but assuming that it's all done correctly, this makes sure this keeps the system about as secure as if the attacker only had one device at a time. Right? So this notion is called proactive security, and it was first conceived by Ostrowski and Young in Pod C91. And it's in a number of follow-ups for a variety of scenarios, right? So for asynchronous networks like Asha and others, threshold signatures with a dishonest majority, we can achieve this notion of dynamic committee. So the people who hold shares keep changing. But there is a gap in those literatures for the threshold wallet case, right? And this is the gap that we address. In all prior works, in order for the system to progress, either an honest majority must speak and participate in the refresh protocol, or everyone in the system must come online, right? And this is not ideal for the threshold wallet case, is the case that we make. So if the wallet is configured to have T parties sign, but 2T to refresh, it's somewhat inconvenient because there's a reason why you pick these parameters. It may be inconvenient to have twice as many people come online. And also this sort of dilutes the assumption that the risk of compromise with each of these devices is correlated, right? If you know, if an attacker knows that all devices are going to come online at the same time and every day, like that creates a new attack surface. So we study proactive refresh where only a dishonest majority of participants has to speak, right? The correct definition for this is a bit subtle. Like ideally, we would want if there are T parties to sign, then also T parties to refresh, and this creates some complications when there's a dishonest majority. So for the 2FN setting, we give a new protocol that's native to the mode of operation of threshold wallets. I'll talk about what that means later. And in the general TFN setting, when T is greater than 2, unfortunately, we show it's impossible. Right, so taking a closer look at what we do in this work, let's go through each point. Right, so first the definition, it's a bit subtle. So we can draw from the MPC literature on studying notions like guaranteed output delivery, fairness, and things like this. And with a dishonest majority, it's too much to expect that the system is always going to progress, right? So we have to allow the adversary to fail the protocol in some sense. And allowing exactly what kind of failure is the subtle part, right? So defining offline refresh. With some loss of generality, but for ease of exposition, mostly to just like give an idea of the structure of how this is going to work. Let's say that secret sharing is done by picking a degree 1 polynomial over polynomials over ZQ. Evaluate this polynomial at 4 points, let's say F0, F1, F2, F3, and give each of these points to each of the devices in the system and define the secret as the polynomial evaluated as 0, right? So this is a useful configuration because now with any 2 devices online, you can produce a signature. And simultaneously, if any one of the online devices crashes, then you can bring the third party online and run sort of a resetting protocol where you can recover from a crash, right? So going forward, it's going to be that the 2 devices on top, that's the like phone and the laptop are going to be the online ones. All right. So let's say that on Monday is when everyone has shares of F, like everyone has a point on F. With proactive security, on Tuesday, everyone's going to have evaluations of a new polynomial H, and it's going to be completely independent of F with the one constraint that evaluated at 0, it's the same. So the secret key is going to be the same across all days. Right, so the communication pattern is going to look something like this, or like it has to look something like this. On Monday, there's some refresh protocol that the online devices run. And they send some refresh package to the offline server, and they sort of go on their merry way. And later, at some arbitrary point in the future, the server comes online and reads this refresh package and manages to move the shares of the same polynomial H, right? So everyone's on the same page ultimately. And this is what a successful execution looks like. But as I said earlier, like a guaranteed progress is too much to ask for, right? So we have to look at exactly how the adversary can fail the protocol. So consider, for instance, if the laptop is corrupted, the laptop is hacked, and it fails the refresh procedure. And so this means that unfortunately you can't progress, but everyone still has shares of F, right? So this means that when the server comes online, there's nothing to do. So on Tuesday, everyone still has shares of F. So we've seen what success looks like, and we've seen what failure looks like, right? And it's sort of tricky to define what happens like in the middle, right? Like what behavior do we want from the system in case of some sort of partial failure, right? So we could have a situation where, let's say someone hacks into the laptop and fails the refresh procedure. And so the online people don't progress, right? The online people stay with shares of F. But the hacker somehow manages to send a message to the offline device. And so that the offline device, the server, when it comes online, refreshes and moves to a new polynomial H. The offline server thinks that the refresh was successful, while the online device, the phone, thinks that it's a failure. right? So this is technically still, it achieves some notion of security because it doesn't harm like unforgeability of any signature scheme that uses this, right? But in our setting, this is not tolerable. So consider a case where on Tuesday, the laptop still continues to stay corrupt. So F2 is inaccessible, right? So the only accessible shares in the system are F1 and H3. And these are, though they're held by honest parties, they don't make any sense when they're combined. They're not compatible shares. So effectively, the secret key is lost forever. And this creates a situation where you can't access your funds anymore. And this is not something that we want. So the definition that we want is something where everyone can agree to fail, right? Like all honest parties should always be in agreement about whether to fail or to progress, to erase previous shares and that sort of thing. And we call this notion an unanimous ratio. Right, so that's the definition. And in the two offense setting, we give an efficient new protocol to achieve this, right? That is native to the way wallets operate. So the challenge is intuitively going to be that two-party computation is inherently unfair, right? So let's recall what the communication pattern should look like. There's some refresh protocol that's run by the online devices, and they send some package to the offline device. Right? To give some concrete name to what they send, let's call them Delta 1 and Delta 2 as the refresh packages. So we can roughly view this as a two-party computation protocol with outputs Delta 1 and Delta 2, right? And in the successful scenario, it's quite easy to see how things proceed. But consider the case where, for instance, the phone is corrupt, right? This means that you can't rely on Delta 1 being transmitted, right? The phone could just refuse to send Delta 1 to the offline device. But as far as the online device is concerned, the protocol terminated successfully. And so the online device is going to move to a new sharing or whatever. It's going to progress. And by unanimous erasure, we have that when the server comes online, because the online honest party has progressed, the offline honest party should also progress. And the lesson that we can draw from this is that Delta 2, which is the package sent by the second party, must be sufficient for the server to refresh itself. Right? Or equivalently Delta 1. It's a symmetric thing. So why does this pose a problem? Because recall that we're viewing this as a two-party computation or a 2PC protocol, right? And 2PC is inherently unfair. So in a situation where the laptop is corrupt, for instance, the laptop could receive Delta 2 before the phone receives Delta 1, right? So the refresh protocol could be aborted and the laptop could get Delta 2. And at its own discretion, it can decide whether or not to send Delta 2 to the server. And remember that Delta 2 is sufficient to trigger a refresh. Right? So now the online honest party doesn't know if the server is going to succeed or if it's going to fail on waking up. Like he has no way of verifying what the other online party is going to do. Right? So towards a solution, we could introduce some sort of powerful consensus primitive like a ledger. Right? So we could specify that all communication has to go through this ledger in some way or something like this. And for example, in the previous case, the Delta 1 and Delta 2 values of what's going to appear on the ledger. And there's no ambiguity about what the server is going to see on waking up. Right? Like when the server wakes up, you're going to see exactly what everyone else sees on the ledger. This solves the unanimous erasure problem, but it kills privacy. Like the whole point of proactive refresh is that you can privately communicate new values or communicate new like refresh packages that stay private in some sense. Right? So this is the general flavor of the problem, that point-to-point channels can convey information privately, but they can't be verified. And public channels can be verified, but they can't convey private information. There are some special challenges in the proactive setting. So you can't like hard to adjust the ciphertext on a ledger, for instance. So our approach is going to be to use point-to-point channels to convey the refresh information and the ledger to achieve consensus on whether or not to use them. Right? And we use a new technique of interleaving threshold signing to achieve this. Right? And we're going to bind the public and private values via some nonsense of signatures that are created by this interleaved threshold signing. So let's take a detour for a moment and look at ECDSA or Schnorr signatures, which is what we consider in this work. So they're based on the hardness of the discrete logarithm problem. And public keys in ECDSA or Schnorr are of the form some capital X is small x times some group generator. Capital X is going to be a curve point, small x is going to be a scalar in ZQ. And signatures are going to be of the form r comma sigma, where r is a nonce, a public nonce, that's a curve point, and sigma is going to be a ZQ element. Right? So the important thing here is that the public nonce r is random. Like for each signature, it's chosen afresh. So we specifically are going to look at threshold ECDSA or Schnorr protocols that have the following structure. The parties exchange some messages and they produce the nonce r, and then they exchange some more messages and they produce the signature sigma, right? And we can roughly divide this into two phases, right? Two distinct phases, phase one and phase two. And we are going to want this additional property that if one of the devices is corrupt and decides to abort the protocol after phase one and not run phase two, for instance, the signature, recall that they are of the form r sigma. R is specified, but the phase two is what computes sigma, and sigma is going to be inaccessible. Right? Specifically, if you don't run phase two, then the adversary has no advantage in computing the sigma, and it has no advantage in completing a full valid signature under R. And this notion is achieved by most natural threshold signature, most natural threshold Schnorr and ECDSA schemes. So it's quite standard. Right, so phase one and phase two of the signature like this, and we're going to abstract them out into neatly encapsulated parts. So we're going, in the gap between phase one and phase two is where we're going to insert our refresh information delta, right? And we're also going to compute some authentication information for this delta, like a signature that's going to authenticate delta and the R that came before it, right? And let's encapsulate this in its own phase. So how is this used in the context of the larger refresh protocol? So the two online devices are going to run phase one of threshold signing, create R, authenticate it, and create a new refresh package. And this refresh package, along with the nonce that was created in phase one, is going to be sent to the offline server. And then they finish the threshold signing. And then on the ledger, what they post is the transaction along with the nonce and the signature that is created from the threshold signing that they just finished. And the important thing is that only after this transaction and signature appear on the ledger do the online devices decide that the refresh was successful. They look out specifically for the signature, and when it appears, they decide to progress. And what the offline device does is when it comes online, it first checks that the update package is valid, like it checks if the signature on delta and R is valid. And then it's going to scan the ledger and check and find a nonce for the signature on the ledger that matches the nonce that it saw on the private channel. So this R on the private channel has to match R on the ledger, right? The nonce has to be the same. And if it does find such a match, then it consumes this refresh package that it got from the offline channel and successfully moves on to the next phase, successfully deletes its old shares. And this is sort of what I mean by native, in that the transaction with the signature is going to appear on the ledger anyway. This is not something that's specific to this protocol. If you're posting transactions to the ledger, you don't have to change anything about what's on the transaction itself, nor do you have to embed some like exchange information as an answer or anything like that. Right. So let's kind of see how things could go wrong here. Let's quantify what power the adversary is going to have. It could use the fact that 2PC is unfair and, for instance, abort the refresh package early and get the refresh package and deprive the other honest party of it. So the other online honest party, the phone, won't be able to send the refresh package. But because we didn't run phase two of the threshold signing, that R value that we created in phase one is going to be useless. Right? This is the property of the threshold signing schemes that we had, that if you don't run phase two, then you're not going to be able to produce a signature on the R. And also in an independent instance of threshold signing, reusing the R value is going to be negligibly likely because it's going to be a large value, and like birthday bounds, whatever, are going to give a low chance of collisions. And now because this R value is never going to appear on the ledger, the update package that's bound to this particular nonce is never going to be triggered. So the update package is useless. There's no point in sending it to the offline person. And even if you do, it's never going to be triggered. Right, so it's a second kind of attack. Back to the main picture. The adversary could decide to withhold the signature from the threshold signing from the other honest party, right? Like, so the signature on the transaction is known only to one party. There are only two things that the adversary can do with this. One is post the transaction with the signature on the ledger, in which case, not post the transaction on the ledger, in which case the update package is never used and it's benign. The other case is that the adversary can post the transaction on the ledger, in which case it's basically equivalent to the honest case and everyone's going to refresh and move on. Right? And so we achieve unanimous erasure. We have an implementation of this to augment some existing 2FN ECDSA protocols. Thanks to Jack Turner for the DKLS implementation. So we use the Bitcoin curve and including some novel protocols to refresh the multiplier state for ECDSA, because threshold ECDSA is more complex than Schnorr, but we show how to re-randomize that as well. We ran some experiments and showed that the computation overhead is pretty small, like under 25%. And communication is only about 200 bytes, no extra rounds. So it's quite practical. It doesn't add a lot over what you're already doing for threshold ECDSA. So that covers our 2FN construction very roughly. And now I'm going to briefly give an idea of why 2FN is impossible. Right, so the background for this is usually verifiable secret sharing or distributed key generation, VSS DKG, in a given setting translates to an equivalent proactive secret sharing protocol, right? So we already have VSS or DKG where only T parties speak. Specifically, if only one honest party speaks with a giant dishonest majority online, everyone just sends a zero knowledge proof that they acted correctly, and you can get VSS in one round like this. It is known to be feasible from the original, one of the early zero knowledge papers. And this gives us the intuition that UFN proactivization in our setting, like with offline refresh, should be feasible. Like if you're willing to throw some heavy zero knowledge proofs at this, everyone just runs the online protocol, proves that they acted honestly when they were creating ciphertexts, things like this, and it should be solvable. But unfortunately, this turns out to be wrong. Right? So in the 3FN case, it's instructive to look at what happens when there are 3 online parties and 1 offline party, like the 3,4 case. So assume that we have a solution where the online parties, the phone, tablet, and laptop, run some sort of protocol, a refresh protocol, and they mail some package to the offline person, the offline server. And it proceeds the same way. Everyone refreshes on Tuesday, right? So assume that we have a protocol that's secure against 2 corruptions, malicious corruptions. And I'm going to claim that the view of this phone is going to be enough for the server to refresh. To see why, consider the case where 2 online parties are corrupt. Everyone who's not the phone, basically. They could just erase what they were supposed to send on the private channel, right? And the view of the phone is indistinguishable from the honest case, right? Like as far as the phone is concerned, everything went smoothly. And so the phone is going to succeed and progress, which means that by unanimous erasure, the offline device, the server, also has to progress, right? So enough information must be contained in what it just received. And as a corollary, we can say that corrupting the phone and the server on Monday is going to give the secret of the server on Tuesday, specifically even after uncorruption. We use claim 1 to derive the state of the server, basically, right? To get an idea of why this gives an attack, let's say we run the protocol on Monday, where the phone and the server are corrupt, and we run the protocol honestly on Tuesday, where the phone and the laptop are corrupt. Right? By the corollary that I just stated, like you can derive the state of the server on Tuesday, even after the refresh. So now you have 2 parties corrupt on Tuesday and a 3rd uncorrupt party whose state you also have. And just by the definition of 3,4, this breaks the scheme because you can now compute arbitrary signatures using the signing key. It takes a few minutes to work out. There's not a lot to it. It's a clean proof, I think, which you'll find in the paper. And hopefully I gave some intuition on how that works. So see the paper for more complicated things like how to get ECDSA to be proactivized. If you're aware of Beaver's OT correlation pick, that's roughly what we use. And adapt to the setting. We give benchmarks for our implementations. Again, thanks Jack for this. And we give more comprehensive discussions of our definitions and justifications and full proofs. And, thanks for your attention. You can find our paper on ePrint, although it's a bit out of date, so email me if you're interested in the most recent version. Like the TFN thing, which is what we prove impossible here, is like an open problem with the ePrint version. But yeah, thanks.